The day my own sister snatched my $5 million cashier's check, laughed right in my face, and tore it into tiny pieces while my 8-year-old son watched in shock, I believe nothing could ever humiliate me more. But then she looked at my military uniform with pure contempt, called me a washed-up soldier who had accomplished nothing, and ordered the bank's security guards to throw me out before I embarrassed our family again. My son gripped my hand so tightly that my fingers went numb as I struggled to hold back tears while strangers stared at us. Rebecca stood there smiling with complete confidence, convinced she had won. What she didn't realize was that the shredded check wasn't the most valuable thing I had brought into that bank that morning. Less than 30 seconds later, the branch manager rushed into the lobby, froze the moment he saw me, stood at full attention, looked directly into my eyes, and quietly spoke a single word that instantly wiped the smile off my sister's face. My name is Olivia Bennett. I'm 29 years old, a colonel in the United States Army, and the proud mother of an incredible 8-year-old son named Ethan. I've dedicated my entire adult life to serving my country, leading soldiers through difficult missions, making impossible decisions under intense pressure, and earning every promotion through discipline, sacrifice, and years of hard work. Unfortunately, none of those achievements ever seemed to matter to my family. To them, I was simply the younger sister who had chosen the military instead of what they considered a respectable career. My older sister, Rebecca, never missed an opportunity to remind me of that. She worked as a senior client advisor at one of the largest banks in our city and loved introducing herself by her impressive job title. Every time our family gathered, she joked that she dealt with real wealth while I survived on government paychecks. I usually smiled politely and changed the subject, not because I believed she was right, but because I had learned that arguing with her never changed anything. About a year earlier, I had quietly invested in a small technology startup founded by a fellow Army veteran I trusted. Against nearly everyone's expectations, the company expanded rapidly and was eventually purchased by a much larger corporation. After every legal document was signed, every financial review was completed, and the sale officially closed, my portion of the proceeds totaled just over $5 million. The bank issued me an official cashier's check, and my only task that morning was to deposit it into my investment account. Since Ethan didn't have school that day, I decided to bring him along. I wanted him to see how banks worked and teach him an important lesson about saving, responsibility, and planning for the future. I expected the trip to be quick, simple, and completely uneventful. I had absolutely no idea we were about to experience the most unforgettable moment of our lives. We walked into the bank just before 10 o'clock that morning. Ethan held my hand with one hand while carrying a small notebook in the other because he wanted to write down everything he learned. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. Then I heard a voice I recognized immediately. "Well, look who finally decided to show up." Rebecca stepped out from behind one of the customer service desks, proudly wearing her employee badge, and a smile that was anything but welcoming. Her eyes quickly moved from my military uniform to the large envelope I was holding. "What's in there?" she asked loudly enough for nearly everyone in the lobby to hear. "Taking care of some important banking business?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "Just some banking business." She let out a mocking laugh. "You? Banking business?" Before I could react, she grabbed the envelope from my hand, pulled out the cashier's check, and stared at the amount printed across the front. For just a brief second, surprise flashed across her face. Then she threw her head back and burst into loud laughter. $5 million? Olivia, you can't seriously expect anyone to believe this. Several customers stopped what they were doing and turned to watch us. I reached toward her and kept my voice steady. "Rebecca, please give it back." Instead, she lifted the check high above her head so I couldn't reach it. "You honestly think this bank is going to believe someone like you walked in carrying a $5 million check?" Before I had the chance to answer, she ripped the cashier's check straight down the middle. The sharp sound of tearing paper echoed through the silent lobby. Ethan gasped beside me, and I felt a small hand tighten around mine as the room fell completely still. "If you send the next part, I'll continue rewriting it in the same style, same length and seamless flow." Rebecca casually dropped the torn pieces of the cashier's check onto the counter as though they meant nothing. "This is obviously fake," she announced loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. Then she looked toward the security staff and said, "Could someone please escort these people outside before they create a scene?" 2 security guards immediately started walking in our direction. Customers began whispering among themselves while Ethan looked up at me with frightened eyes. I took a slow, steady breath and remained exactly where I was. When the guard stopped a few feet away, neither of them made any attempt to touch us. One of them politely asked if there was a problem. Before I could answer, Rebecca pointed toward the shredded pieces of the cashier's check scattered across the counter. "She's trying to deposit a fake $5 million check," she declared confidently. "Please remove them from the bank." The guards exchanged uncertain glances, and one reached toward his radio. At that exact moment, the branch manager hurried out of his office after hearing the disturbance. His eyes scanned the crowded lobby before settling on me. For a brief second, he looked puzzled. Then his expression changed completely as recognition replaced confusion. Without acknowledging Rebecca, he walked straight past her and stopped directly in front of me. He stood a little straighter, extended his hand with respect, and smiled warmly. "Good morning, Colonel Bennett." The entire lobby fell silent. Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. "What did you just call her?" she asked. The manager ignored the question completely. "It's an honor to see you again, Colonel," he said. "We met at the Veterans Leadership Scholarship ceremony last year." I remembered him immediately. His bank had sponsored scholarships for military families, and after the ceremony, we had spoken for quite a while about financial education and helping service members prepare for civilian life. "It's good to see you again," I replied politely. His smile faded the moment he noticed the torn cashier's check lying on the counter. "What happened here?" he asked. Rebecca immediately stepped forward. "I was protecting the bank from fraud." The manager didn't respond. Instead, he carefully gathered every torn piece of the check and examined them closely. His face became noticeably serious. Then he looked toward the security guards. "No one is leaving," he said firmly. Finally, he turned toward Rebecca. "And no one says another word until we know exactly what happened." For the first time that morning, I saw genuine worry appear on my sister's face. She was beginning to understand that she might have made an incredibly costly mistake. The branch manager carried the torn cashier's check into his office with remarkable care and invited Ethan and me to come inside. Another employee politely asked Rebecca to remain outside. She objected immediately. "I work here. I have every right to be in that office." The manager calmly shook his head. "Not while this investigation is taking place." For the first time in many years, Rebecca was no longer the person in control. Inside the office, the manager sincerely apologized for everything that had happened before contacting the bank's verification department. Although the check had been torn apart, every security feature, serial number, and authentication code could still be confirmed through the bank's official record. The wait felt much longer than it actually was. Ethan sat quietly beside me without saying a word. I smiled reassuringly and gently squeezed his shoulder. "Everything is going to be okay." A few minutes later, the manager's phone rang. He listened carefully, thanked the representative on the other end, and slowly placed the receiver down before looking directly at me. "Colonel Bennett, I'm pleased to confirm that the cashier's check has been fully verified. The funds are completely legitimate, and every detail matches our record." I simply nodded. That's exactly what I expected. Outside the office, Rebecca's voice became louder as she continued insisting that she had only been protecting the bank. The manager requested the lobby's security footage. The recording clearly showed Rebecca taking the cashier's check from my hands without permission before tearing it apart herself. There was no misunderstanding, no missing information, and no confusion, only undeniable facts. Several employees quietly admitted that this wasn't the first time Rebecca had treated customers disrespectfully simply because she assumed they weren't important. The manager thanked each of them for their honesty and carefully documented every statement. He then picked up the telephone again, but this time he called the bank's regional director. "I believe you'll want to be here personally," he said calmly. After ending the call, he turned back toward me. "Colonel Bennett, on behalf of everyone at this branch, I sincerely apologize." I glanced through the office window at Ethan. At that moment, I realized the most valuable thing leaving that bank wouldn't be the money. It would be the lesson my son had just witnessed. Less than 30 minutes later, the regional director arrived. Before asking a single question about the money, he requested to watch the complete security footage from beginning to end. The video showed exactly what everyone had already seen. Rebecca had taken the cashier's check from my hands without permission, publicly mocked me in front of customers, and deliberately ripped it apart before anyone had even attempted to verify it. Afterward, witnesses were invited to share what they had seen. One customer explained how Ethan had quietly stood beside me throughout the entire incident. Another described how I had never once raised my voice, even after being publicly humiliated. Finally, an elderly gentleman looked directly at the regional director and said, "Your employee decided who she was before she knew a single fact." The room became completely silent. The regional director thanked every witness before turning toward me. "Colonel Bennett, please accept my sincerest apology to both you and your son. This should never have happened inside one of our branches." I appreciated the professionalism in his voice. "Thank you," I replied. "All I ever wanted was to be treated fairly." He nodded. "And that is exactly what you'll receive." While another employee began processing the paperwork required to replace the damaged cashier's check through the bank's official procedures, Ethan gently tugged on my sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, "why didn't you yell when Aunt Rebecca was being so mean?" I smiled softly. "Because people are always watching how we respond, especially during the hardest moment." He thought about my answer for a few seconds before smiling. "I think I understand." As we completed the deposit, I realized that the $5 million had never been the most important part of that day. The greatest investment I had made was in the lesson my son would remember for the rest of his life. Respect is never earned through pride or arrogance. It is earned through integrity, patience, and character. A few weeks later, send the final part of the script for rewriting in the same style. A few weeks later, the bank officially completed its internal investigation. The regional director personally called to inform me that the review had been finalized and that appropriate disciplinary action had been taken in accordance with the bank's policies. Although he couldn't share every detail because of confidentiality rules, he assured me that what Ethan and I experienced had been taken very seriously and would not be overlooked. That was all I needed to hear. I had never been interested in revenge. What I wanted was accountability, fairness, and the assurance that no other family would have to experience what we had gone through. As Ethan and I drove home that evening, he spent several minutes quietly looking out the window before finally asking the question I knew had been weighing on his mind. "Mom, weren't you angry?" I smiled. "Of course I was. Then why didn't you argue with Aunt Rebecca?" I glanced at him for a moment before returning my attention to the road. Because true leadership isn't about proving you're the loudest person in the room. It's about making the right decision, even when your emotions are telling you to do something else. He sat quietly for a few seconds before nodding. So staying calm was actually stronger than shouting. Exactly. When we arrived home, Ethan wrapped his arms around me in the biggest hug he could make. "I'm proud you're my mom." Those 6 simple words meant more to me than every promotion, medal, investment, or professional achievement I had ever received. The $5 million would certainly help provide security for our future, but the lesson my son carried home that day was worth far more than any amount of money. A piece of paper can be torn apart in seconds, but true character cannot. When it is built on honesty, patience, humility, and integrity, it only becomes stronger when tested. That Saturday, Ethan and I spent the afternoon at our favorite neighborhood park with nothing more than homemade sandwiches, a football, and the chance to enjoy each other's company. As the sun slowly began to set, he looked over at me with a thoughtful smile. "You know what I'm going to remember most about that day at the bank?" I laughed softly. "The $5 million? He shook his head. "No, I'm going to remember that you stayed kind when it would have been so much easier to be angry." His answer caught me completely by surprise. Out of everything that had happened, the public humiliation, the torn cashier's check, the investigation, and the apology, that was the lesson he had chosen to keep. In that moment, I realized the money would help build our future, but it could never compare to the example he had witnessed. Looking back now, I understand that people will sometimes judge you by your appearance, your profession, or the assumptions they choose to make long before they know the truth. But pressure has a remarkable way of revealing a person's real character. Some people allow it to expose their pride, while others allow it to strengthen their integrity. In the end, the greatest inheritance I could ever leave my son would never be measured in dollars. It would be the example of honesty, patience, courage, and character that no one could ever tear apart. This completes the full rewrite with a realistic, emotional, human-written style, while keeping the original story, pacing, and approximately the same length.